This is Smart Consulting Sourcing, the only podcast about consulting procurement or how to buy consulting services. You'll get tips on how to use consulting, buy consulting, and managing the consulting. And now your host, Helene Lafitte.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Smart Consulting Sourcing, the podcast that delves into the world of consulting procurement. I am Helene, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join me as we continue to explore the topic of how to buy consulting services like a pro. Today, we will dive into the topic of drafting the perfect consulting agreement. I know, the thought of lawyerly terms like payment terms, intellectual property, confidentiality, and liability may sound a bit dull, but trust me, these elements are the backbone of risk mitigation and efficient project management. So get ready to sharpen your pencils and open your ears because this session is super important. But before we jump into that, let's do a quick recap of last week's episode. We explored the critical components of the statements of work, which serves as the roadmap for your project. It encompasses the project's context, objectives, scope, and expected deliverables. So by having a well-defined SOW, everyone involved is on the same page and knows exactly what needs to be accomplished. So we also discussed the significance of project milestones. These milestones act as checkpoints to track progress and ensure timely delivery. So by clearly defining when each deliverable is expected, you can maintain accountability, establish milestone-based payment schedules that align with project progress, right? Project governance and acceptance criteria were next on our agenda. Although often overlooked, these elements are essential for successful project management. Establishing a clear project governance structure ensures effective oversight and decision-making. Meanwhile, defining acceptance criteria provides a shared understanding of the standards by which deliverables will be evaluated and approved, ensuring a successful outcome. And we also touched upon the importance of considering key personnel, by specifying expectation regarding the expertise and availability of certain individuals within the consulting firm. You can ensure that you have the right team in place to meet your project's unique needs. And lastly, we emphasized the significance of status reports and communication protocols. These tools facilitate open and transparent communication between all parties involved. So defining the frequency and format of status reports and establishing expectations for problem reporting promotes proactive problem solving and keeps the project on track. It's by focusing on building solid project management foundations that you can pave the way for smooth and efficient project execution. And as procurement professional, your expertise in defining project requirements, selecting the right consulting firms, and shaping the consulting agreement is instrumental in guiding stakeholders and mitigating risk from the start. Remember, a well-crafted consulting agreement sets the project for success and maximizing the impact of your initiative. So if you happen to miss out on last week's episode, you can easily catch up on all the major streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. And for those who prefer reading or want to dive deeper into the content, we've got you covered with the full transcript available on our website, consultingquest.com, in the thought leadership section. But hey, a little favor to ask. If you're enjoying your podcast and finding it valuable, we'd be absolutely thrilled if you could show it some love. Give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to spread the word to your colleagues and peers. Together, we can create a community of smart consulting sourcing enthusiasts and take the consulting procurement world by storm. But now, it's time to dive into the fascinating world of terms and conditions for consulting services. Brace yourself, because we're about to embark on a journey where each company has its unique perspectives and templates. In fact, rumor has it that even within the same company, different business units may have their own variations, right? However, some key elements should be included in these agreements, and that's exactly what we'll be exploring today. So with no further ado, let's kickstart this exciting discussion, shall we? First thing first, it's essential to start the project on your terms. I highly recommend working closely with your legal team to develop a template to be the foundation for all your consulting projects, especially if you frequently buy consulting services. Now, let's talk about the commercial terms. This is where you define how the consultants will be paid for their services. So it's important to be crystal clear about the amounts and the condition tied to them, right? If you're going with the hourly fee structure, specify the detailed amounts for each type of consultant, whether they are handicapped, hard or soft, and the number of hours required to reach those caps. On the other hand, if you opt for a risk-sharing model, clearly define the variable compensation, the metrics upon which it's based, and how these metrics will be measured. Next up, payment terms and tax considerations. So every consulting agreement should include a section that outlines the payment terms. Make sure to negotiate terms that align with your company's policy. Typically the contract will state the net price before any sales tax is applied. So it's also important to set a time limit for when payments are due. The standard terms usually fall between 30 to 60 days after the invoice is issued. Additionally, define the timing of the payments, whether they be weekly, monthly, phase-based, or in a lump sum. For a large project, the monthly payment schedule might be more suitable. Also, consider adding a detailed description of the fees in the appendix. This ensures that everyone is on the same page and avoids any confusions down the road. Also, keep in mind that the prices should be held firm for the duration of the project, unless otherwise specified. In some cases, the consulting firm may negotiate the option to establish a penalty for late payment. If you decide to accept penalties, it's a good idea to add an incentive for early payments as well. This encourages timely payments and fosters a positive working relationship. If your project has a strict timeline, you can introduce incentive for early delivery and or penalties for late delivery. This helps maintain accountability and ensures that deadlines are met. Finally, let's touch on renewal and extension options. Including these provisions can be beneficial, especially when the scope of work is still uncertain. For recurring project or project with multiple phases, you can add conditions for renewal. However, it's important to note that the decision to extend and you renew the contract should ultimately rest with the client. Well, there you have it. Commercial terms may not be the most glamorous part of the consulting agreement, but they are vital for establishing clear expectation, ensuring fair compensation, and setting the stage for a successful partnership. Now, let's set the ground rule for a solid consulting agreement. There are a few key elements to consider, starting with confidentiality. This clause is crucial to protect sensitive information and ensure that the consultant doesn't disclose any details about your project. Take a close look at the intellectual property and confidentiality clauses in the contract and negotiate the wording based on the specific project requirements. If certain types of this confidential information are of particular concern to you, clearly state them in plain English within the contract. It's also important to understand the limitation of confidentiality agreements, especially when working globally. Different cultures and countries may have varying approaches and laws regarding confidentiality. Keep in mind that confidentiality should be time-bound and limited to specific geographic areas. Now, let's talk about third parties. Many consulting firms work with partners and subcontractors, so it's important to clarify how they will be handled. You can request to be informed if any third party is involved in the project. Additionally, you can decide whether these third parties should sign a separate NDA or rely on the consulting firm to ensure their compliance with the NDA they signed with you. Intellectual property is another critical aspect to address in the agreement. While the materials developed during the project, such as presentations and reports, typically belong to the client, the consulting firm may have pre-existing intellectual capital and methodologies that they retain ownership of. In this case, it's important to negotiate the right for the client to freely use the results while respecting consulting firms' intellectual property rights. Don't forget to request access to any data gathered on your behalf during the project, such as models or interview transcripts, settle just for the final deliverable. Make sure you have access to the underlying data as well. If you're working with sensitive information, it's crucial to include security requirements in the contract. This encompasses data and information handling policies, onboarding and vetting procedures for consulting working with your data, and health and safety policies to ensure the well-being of the consultants on your premises. Now, in certain cases, a conflict of interest may arise if the consulting firm already works with one of your competitors or clients. In such instances, you can negotiate exclusivity. Remember that it often comes with additional fees. So you can include a list of specific companies or broader definitions of competitors in your contract. If you don't want the consulting firm to work with your competitors after the project is completed, a non-compete clause can be added. However, it's important to provide a reasonable time limit and scope for these clauses, as they can be difficult to enforce and should be used sparingly. By addressing these elements in your consulting agreement, you are establishing clear guidelines and safeguards to protect your confidential information, intellectual property rights, and ensure and secure a successful consulting agreement. Lastly, let's anticipate potential issues that may arise during the course of the project. Even with the best planning, unforeseen circumstances can arise, and it's essential to be prepared. By thinking ahead and considering various scenarios, you can develop strategies to address potential challenges and find alternative solutions. So during the project, changes in scope may occur, but it's important to minimize these changes as much as possible and maintain the agreed upon terms and conditions. However, if changes are necessary, it's crucial to document them properly to avoid any disagreements later on, including a clause in the contract stipulating that any changes must be made in written can help ensure clarity and accountability. Governing law, also known as choice of law, is a critical aspect of the contract. Discuss with your legal team to determine which jurisdiction's law will best protect your interests in a consulting agreement. It's also important to consider any demands or preferences that your consulting supplier may have regarding governing law and address them during the negotiation process. In the competitive consulting industry, talent retention is crucial for both parties, and it's healthy practice to forbid yourself from poaching the consulting firm's best talents, and in return, expect the same commitment from them. Now, liabilities, indemnification, and warranties are also important considerations to mitigate risks for your company. During the negotiation process, these aspects are typically discussed in detail to ensure both parties are equally protected. Indemnification clauses can help limit liability by requiring the consulting supplier to have the appropriate level of insurance coverage. Termination of the consulting agreement usually occurs at the end of the project once the services have been delivered and payment has been made. However, there may be circumstances where termination is necessary before the project's completion. This includes breach of contract, lack of performance, or force majeure events. So it's important to have a termination clause in the contract that addresses these scenarios and provides guidelines for both parties. Additionally, you may consider including a provision that allows either party to terminate the contract with advance notice. In certain projects, you may want to include a right to audit clauses in the agreement. This allows you to verify if the consulting firm is in compliance with your client policies or other specific requirements. When including an audit clause, clearly define who will conduct the audit, the scope of the audit, and who will bear the associated cost. By addressing these potential issues and incorporating the necessary clauses in your consulting agreement, you can better manage risks, protect your interest, and ensure a smoother and more successful consulting engagement. So before we wrap up this episode, let's take a moment to reflect on the importance of the statement of works and term and condition in a consulting agreement. As procurement professional, we hold a critical role in ensuring the success of consulting projects. Just like the last defender on a rugby team, we step onto the stage to defend the project interest and lay the groundwork for a strong defense. While consultants and clients are the team players, we act as the gatekeepers, ensuring that the SOW and the contract terms align with the project objective and mitigate potential risk. Our role should never be underestimated. Now we've come to the end of today's podcast. So here are the main points to remember. Start the project on your terms. Work with your legal team to draft a template that will serve as the basis for all your consulting projects, ensuring consistency and alignment with your company policies. Clearly define the commercial terms. Specify how the consultants will be paid, including detailed amounts, payment timing, or any cap of variable compensation arrangements. Address confidentiality and intellectual property. Ensure that the contract includes robust confidentiality clause and outlines ownership rights for materials developed during the project. Consider security requirements for handling sensitive information. Handle third-party involvement. Determine how third-party partners or subcontractors will be managed and ensure compliance with any non-disclosure agreement. Clarify intellectual property rights for third-party contribution as well. Anticipate potential issues as well. Plan for different scenarios and include provisions for contract changes, governing laws, war of talents, liability, termination, and the right to opt. Protect your interest while limiting risks. Right? Remember, the consulting agreement sets the stage for a successful collaboration. And by addressing those key elements, you're establishing clear expectation, you protect your company's interest, and you lay the foundation for a smooth consulting project. So next week, get ready for another enlightening discussion on the overlooked aspect of consulting sourcing, managing consulting projects. We'll dive into the essential strategies that will help you to effectively structure project management. And this time we'll be focusing on your role as a client or stakeholder in the process. So till then, stay safe and keep up the smart consulting sourcing game. And remember, if you have any questions or need additional support with your consulting procurement initiative, I'm always game for a chat. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn and drop me an email. Au revoir for now and happy sourcing.
You've been listening to Smart Consulting Sourcing, the only podcast about consulting procurement. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit the website at consultingquest.com. Find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. For questions and comments, send an email to ellen.lafitte@consultingquest.com. See you next time.